tuning in. This is Exciting Bible Questions with Pastor Joseph Cardy, where we take real practical Bible questions and answer them. The first question today is, do we still have to pay tithe?
As we study the Bible, we find the concept of tithe all throughout. Abraham paid tithe and Jacob paid tithe. Now that goes back pretty far. And then Paul in the New Testament talks about tithe. And God never said anywhere that we should do away with it. There's no New Testament writer that says we no longer have to pay tithe. Now some people misquote the saying of Jesus to teach that we don't have to pay tithe. In Matthew chapter 23 verse 23, he said, "Woe to the scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you pay tithe in mint and anise and cumin. Now those are herbs in your garden, but you've omitted the weightier matters like justice and mercy and faith." And then he goes on to say that they should have done both and not leave the other undone. Well, the other was tithe. He says, I'm not saying don't pay tithe, but don't forget about justice and mercy and faith. So it's interesting. Christ really answered the question on tithe in that statement. He says not to leave tithe undone. And then, of course, you read in Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, that God promises to open the windows of heaven for those who pay tithe. Now, why would God say that in the last book of the Old Testament, and then you turn the page to Matthew, and then he says, don't worry about this anymore? You see what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense. Tithe is to support the ministry of the church. We still need that. We have ministry of the church today. So I know that there are people that misuse tithe, but I guess my advice is to remember that you're paying tithe to God, not to a person.
Here's a very popular question. Does the Bible say that the mark of the beast is the number 666?
The quick and simple answer is no. Let me explain. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 17 and 18, it says this, "And that no man may buy or sell except he has the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Let's see what that's saying. It's saying that the beast has three things that you don't want. The three things that you don't want are the mark, the number, and the name. So it talks about the mark as being something different than the number. And then it goes on to say that the number is 666, and it's the number of a man. So the mark and the number are two different things. The number is 666, and the mark is something different.
So is the mark of the beast actually just the number of the beast stamped in the hand and the forehead?
Again, the short answer would be no. The Bible teaches that the mark of the beast will be given in the hand and the forehead, but this is most likely not a physical mark that can be traced, and it's probably not the number of the beast at all. Much of the book of Revelation is symbolic. Now we see in the book of Revelation this beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns and it comes out of the sea. Obviously that's not literal. There's not going to be a 7-headed monster walking around eating people alive at the end of time. Now the same is true of the mark of the beast. It's not a literal mark. The mark of the beast is a symbol that is given to those that reject God at the end of time. Those who receive this mark, clearly they go to hell. And God doesn't send people to hell just because they end up getting a little tattoo or rubber sticker mark on their hand like when you get to the fair. God sends people to hell because they reject his offer of grace and do not want to be saved. If you'd like to know more about this topic, just call in and I'll send you this free book. It's called The Beast, Who Will Worship It?
If you are listening and would like a copy of this free book, the number for this is 855-41-TRUTH. The number again is 855-418-7884. Here's another question. Jesus says to forgive 7 times 70. Do we really need to forgive that many times?
Let me try to handle this a couple of different ways. First of all, there are times at which the safety of our lives or our families are at stake. Now, if your spouse is beating you, or if you're being abused by somebody, or if your children are being abused by somebody, you might need to leave for your own safety. This is different than forgiveness. Don't say, oh, we need to forgive 7 times 70 and put your way in harm's danger. You can still forgive somebody without putting yourself in a place of abuse. But what the Bible does teach is that God can give us victory over holding grudges against somebody. At times, when we hear the word or the number 7 times 70, that's 490. We think, oh man, that's too many times. How can I forgive that many times? But let me turn the question around on you. Would you like God to forgive you that many times? If you would like to receive that type of forgiveness from God, I think God expects us to be able to do the same. In Romans chapter 12, verse 19 and 20, it says, friends, do not avenge yourselves. Instead, leave room for his wrath. That's God's wrath. For it is written, vengeance belongs to me, says the Lord, and I will repay. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. For in so doing, you will be heaping fiery coals on his head. Now God says the best thing we can do when somebody has wronged us is find a way to serve that person. God does not say the best thing to do is just avoid them. He says we should go out of our way to find a way to bless them.
Thank you.
Then we end up leaving the rest to God. You see, there are too many people who want the easy way out of forgiveness. They just want to say, well, I'm not really going to forgive this person. I'm just not going to be around them anymore. That is not forgiveness. Forgiveness is when we can be around that person, we can truly serve them, and the anger from whatever past situation does not well up within us when we're in their presence. God gives us victory over those emotions of the past. And by his grace and through his love, we can treat people that have wronged us as if they're just like people who we love.
The last question for today is, could you please explain the Bible verse, absent from the body and present with the Lord?
Yes, this is another verse that's commonly misunderstood. Many people have taught teachings about this verse that Paul is saying that he's having an out-of-body experience, or that Paul's teaching what happens when people die and go to heaven. The fact is that both of those are wrong. Paul's not teaching any of that. In fact, it's kind of taking the verse out of context to say that. Paul is actually not teaching about what happens when somebody dies. Paul instead is teaching the idea that he is longing to be out of his body and to have the glorious body that God is going to give him when he dies. So the only way to really understand this is to read the whole thing in context. This comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 8, but I'm going to read all the way from verse 1 through verse 8 so you can see the whole thing in context. It says, "For we know that if our temporary and earthly body is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal body in the heavens, not made with hands. Indeed, we groan in this body, desiring to be putting on our dwelling from heaven, since we are clothed, and we will not be found naked. Indeed, we groan while we are in this tent, burdened as we are, because we do not want to be clothed, but we want to be clothed, so that mortality may be swallowed up by life. And the one who prepared us for this very purpose is God, who gave us the Spirit as a down payment. So we are always confident, and we know that while we are at home in this body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith and not by sight. But we are confident, and I say willing, rather to be absent from this body and to be present with the Lord. So, let me summarize this. Paul starts off by saying that he's tired of this earthly body, and he goes on to say that he wishes he had the heavenly body that we're going to have when we get to heaven. And that in itself is not teaching, as people say, that we're going to have this out-of-body experience when we go to heaven, that we're going to leave the body and be there only in spirit, as some people teach. No, actually, Paul is teaching that when we get rid of this body, this old rickety body, we're going to get an awesome glorified body from heaven. In fact, in chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians, Paul says exactly that. He says, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall receive a glorious body. So in this chapter, though, that we just read, Paul goes on to say that I can't wait to have this new body and get rid of the old one. And he uses these words like absent from the body and present with the Lord. He says, I can't wait to be absent from this body. In other words, I can't wait to get rid of this body and to be present with the Lord. Now, he's not saying here that he's going to have an out-of-body experience, like I'm going to leave my body and go to the Lord. He's saying, I can't wait to get rid of this body when I go to heaven. You know, there's a lot of older people who say, oh, I can't wait to get rid of these old painful knees, and I can't wait to, get rid of this arm that doesn't work right anymore. And, I have 3 or 4 ladies in my church that just went through joint replacements. They're going to be very happy when they get rid of this body. And as will I, even though I'm young. I still can't wait to have the kind of body that I'm going to have in heaven. So Paul is not talking about an out-of-body experience here either. Paul is talking about the idea that when he wants to be somewhere, he longs to be there so much that he feels like he's actually there with God in heart. So let me show you another place where where Paul uses this exact same language. In the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1 through 3, it says, he's talking about this person that's in the church and they've done something really sinful and they need to be taken care of. It says, it is widely reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and the kind of sexual immorality that is not even tolerated among the Gentiles. There is a man living with his father's wife, and you are inflated with pride instead of filled with grief, so that he who has committed this act might be removed from your congregation. For though I am absent in body, I'm present with you in spirit, and I have already decided about the one who has done this thing as though I were present. So here Paul is talking about this man. He's been caught in this sin. Was in this incestuous relationship, and Paul tells them that this man needs to be disciplined by the church. And he's saying, my heart is with you on the matter. In fact, I've already ruled on the matter. And he goes on to tell them that they need to discipline him. And he feels that he's with them so much so that he's actually absent from his body and present with them in spirit on the matter. And that he's already judged and they can go ahead and fulfill his judgment on the issue. So he uses the same phrase. I wish so much that I was absent from this body and present with you in spirit. It's just Paul's way of saying that I long to be there so much. If you'd like to know a little bit more about this topic, please call me at the toll-free number, and I will send you this book for free. It's called Absent from the Body.
The number to call for this free book is 855-41-TRUTH. 855-418-7884. Thank you for joining us with exciting Bible questions.
This is Pastor Joseph Carty.
And this is Raluca Carty. Tune in next week.